blade stopped 3 inches from Commander Riker's throat. Not because he blocked it, not because reinforcements arrived, but because the Omega holding it chose mercy over victory. Riker's breath came in sharp bursts as he stared into eyes that held no rage, no fear, only calm, absolute control. Around them, 5 of the Alpha King's elite guards lay sprawled across the forest floor, disarmed but unharmed, their weapons scattered like fallen leaves. The finest warriors in the kingdom, brought down by someone who shouldn't have been capable of standing against even one of them. "You could have killed us," Riker managed, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you?" The Omega stepped back, lowering her blade. "Because this doesn't have to end in blood. It never did." Then she turned and disappeared into the shadows between the ancient pines, leaving 6 elite guards to face something far more terrifying than defeat, the walk of shame back to their king. Alive only because an Omega had granted them mercy. If you're already hooked, wait until you hear what the Alpha King does when he finds out. Stay with me. News of the incident spread through the capital like wildfire. By sunset, every wolf in the kingdom had heard some version of the story. In taverns and training yards, in market squares and council chambers, the impossible tale was whispered, embellished, debated. An Omega had defeated the elite guard. An Omega had shown them mercy. An Omega had walked away. The throne room fell silent as Commander Riker finished his report. Alpha King Kade sat motionless on his seat of carved obsidian, his expression unreadable. Around him, council members exchanged glances, some shocked, others skeptical, all waiting for the inevitable explosion of royal fury. But it didn't come. Instead, Kade's voice cut through the silence, measured and precise. "Tell me again, the part about the injuries." Riker straightened despite his bruised pride. "None, Your Majesty. She disarmed us, disabled us, but caused no lasting harm. She could have slit our throats. She chose not to. And her demeanor, was she arrogant, mocking? No, Your Majesty. She was calm, respectful even. She said it didn't have to end in blood." Counselor Thorne leaned forward, his elderly face creased with disapproval. "Your Majesty, this is clear defiance. The Omega rejected pack submission, attacked your guards, defended herself," Kade interrupted quietly. "There's a difference. She made fools of our finest warriors." No, Kade stood, his towering frame commanding immediate attention. "Our finest warriors underestimated an opponent based on designation rather than capability. That's their failure, not hers." He turned to Riker. "You said she spoke to you. What else did she say?" Riker hesitated, then met his king's eyes. "She said we came at her like she was prey. She said she only wanted to be left alone. But if we insisted on hunting her like an animal, she'd prove she wasn't one." A strange light flickered in Kade's eyes, something between intrigue and respect. And she proved it without spilling a drop of blood. He was quiet for a long moment, and delivered his command with absolute authority. Find her. Bring her to me, unharmed, unbound, and treated with the respect you show any visiting dignitary. Is that clear? Your Majesty, Thorn protested. She defied pack law. She defended herself from 6 armed warriors who tracked her like prey, Kade said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. If that's a crime, then every wolf in this kingdom who's ever stood their ground is guilty. He looked at each council member in turn. I want to meet the Omega who defeated my elite guard without hatred, who chose mercy when she could have chosen vengeance. I want to understand what drives someone to that kind of restraint. Curious what happens when they finally meet face to face. You're not ready for this. 3 days later, she stood before him. The guards had found her at dawn, camping beside a waterfall in the Northern Territories. According to their report, she'd been reading when they approached, and she'd greeted them with wary courtesy, asking only one question: am I being arrested or invited? When told it was an invitation, she'd gathered her few belongings and accompanied them without resistance. Now she stood in the great hall of the palace, and Kade found himself genuinely surprised. She was smaller than he'd imagined, her frame lean rather than muscular, her dark hair braided simply down her back. She wore traveler's clothes, practical leather, and worn fabric that marked her as someone who lived on roads rather than in comfort. But it was her eyes that caught him. They held a depth of awareness that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. She didn't bow. She didn't challenge. She simply stood, waiting, her posture respectful, but not submissive. You know who I am, Kade said. It wasn't a question. Alpha King Kade, ruler of the 7 territories, commander of the United Packs. Her voice was steady, clear. Yes, I know who you are. And yet you don't bow. I don't bow to anyone, but I do offer respect to those who have earned it. She met his gaze directly. Your reputation suggests you have. Around the room, council members bristled. No one spoke to the Alpha King this way. But Kade raised a hand, silencing any protests before they could form. What's your name? Sera. Just Sera. Just Sera. I left my pack name behind when I left the pack. Why did you leave? For the first time, something flickered across her face, old pain, carefully contained. Because I was told my entire life that being Omega meant being weak, that it meant submission, obedience, silence, that my value lay in serving others, not in becoming myself. She paused. I disagreed. So you ran. So I walked away. There's a difference. Kade descended from his throne, moving closer. His size should have been intimidating. He stood nearly a foot taller than her, his presence filling the space like a storm front. But she didn't flinch, didn't step back. My guards say you defeated them without killing them, that you showed mercy. I showed restraint, also a difference. Explain. Sera's eyes never left his. Mercy implies they were at my mercy to begin with. Restraint means I chose not to escalate violence that didn't need to exist. They came at me with intent to capture. I defended myself with intent to survive. Killing them would have been unnecessary, and unnecessary violence is just cruelty wearing a different mask. The room fell, absolutely silent. Kade studied her for a long moment. You speak like someone who's thought deeply about strength and violence. I've had to. When you're designated Omega from birth, you learn quickly that the world sees you as weak. You have two choices, believe it or prove otherwise. I chose to prove otherwise, but not by becoming what I opposed. And what did you oppose? The idea that strength means domination, that power means control, that leadership is about forcing others beneath you rather than lifting them beside you. She tilted her head slightly. Why am I here, Your Majesty? You could have ordered me executed for attacking your guards. You could have had me imprisoned. Instead, you invited me to your palace. Why? The answer he gives changes everything. Keep watching. Kade smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually stern features. Because in 200 years of ruling, I've met countless wolves who defeated others through superior violence. But I've never met one who defeated others through superior restraint. That interested me. And now that you've met me, now I'm even more interested. He gestured to a servant. Show Sera to the guest quarters in the East Wing. She's to be treated as an honored visitor. Anything she requires, provide it. Counselor Thorne stood abruptly. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. Noted. Thorne dismissed. As the council filed out, shooting confused and disapproving glances at Sera, Kade remained. When they were alone save for two guards at the door, he spoke again. You're free to leave whenever you wish, but I'd like you to stay for a while, as my guest. Why? Because I think you see something the rest of my kingdom doesn't. And I'd like to understand what that is. Sera considered him carefully. And if what I see challenges everything your kingdom is built on, then perhaps it's time my kingdom was challenged. The next weeks unfolded in ways no one in the palace expected. Sera didn't hide in her quarters like a proper guest. She walked the grounds freely, observing training sessions, talking with servants, sitting in on diplomatic meetings when invited. Kade had given her access to nearly everything, curious to see what she'd do with it. What she did was listen. In the training yards, she watched young warriors spar with a critical eye. After one particularly brutal session, where a senior fighter repeatedly humiliated a younger opponent, she approached the instructor. That wasn't training, she said quietly. The scarred wolf turned to her with barely concealed contempt. And what would an Omega know about warrior training? I know the difference between teaching someone to be stronger and teaching them to be cruel. That young fighter you humiliated, he has talent. But now he's learning that strength means making others feel small. Is that really what you want to teach? This is how we've always trained. That doesn't make it right." The instructor bristled, but before he could respond, Sera turned to the young warrior who'd been beaten down. "You dropped your guard twice on the left side, not because you're slow, but because you're protecting an old injury. Shoulder." The young wolf nodded, surprised. "Adjust your stance like this," she demonstrated, shifting her weight differently. "It compensates for the weakness while you build back strength, and it gives you better leverage for close combat." The young warrior tried the stance, his eyes widening as he felt the difference. "Who taught you to fight?" the instructor demanded. "People who understood that real strength doesn't need an audience," Sera replied. "It just needs purpose." Word of the exchange spread quickly. Soon, warriors were seeking her observations, her perspective. She never claimed to be their superior. She simply offered what she saw with a clarity that cut through ego and tradition. In the servants' quarters, she noticed things others missed. A young kitchen worker struggling with burns because the stove placement forced awkward reaches. A housemaid developing back problems from carrying heavy loads up badly designed stairs. Small inefficiencies that created unnecessary suffering. She mentioned them to the head of household, not as criticism, but as observation. "These aren't complaints," she said. "They're opportunities. Small changes could prevent lasting harm." When the changes were implemented, the stove repositioned. A pulley system installed for the stairs, productivity improved, and injuries decreased. The servants began to see her not as a strange Omega guest, but as someone who actually noticed them, valued them. But here, where things get really interesting, watch what happens next. The turning point came during a council meeting about territory disputes. Sera sat in the corner, invited by Kade to observe. Two neighboring packs were on the verge of war over hunting grounds, each claiming the other had violated ancient boundaries. The council debated military intervention, trade sanctions, all the usual tools of dominance and control. Sera listened for nearly an hour before speaking. Has anyone asked them what they actually need? The room fell silent. Counselor Thorne looked at her with thinly veiled irritation. We know what they need. They need to respect boundaries. No, Sera said calmly. They need food. They need resources. The boundaries are just symbols of those needs. If both packs are hunting the same grounds, it's because those grounds have what they require to survive. So the question isn't who owns the land. The question is why they both need it, and whether there's enough to share or alternatives to provide. Kade leaned forward. Continue. Send negotiators, not judges. Ask both packs what resources they're actually struggling to secure. Maybe one pack needs the grounds for deer, while the other needs the river access. Maybe they're hunting the same territory because their traditional grounds have been depleted by drought or disease. Address the actual needs, and the boundary dispute might resolve itself. And if they refuse to negotiate, Thorne challenged, Then you intervene with authority. But you don't start with the stick when you haven't tried offering solutions. Sera met Kade's eyes. Power doesn't mean forcing compliance. It means having the strength to find better answers than violence. The council erupted in debate, but Kade raised his hand for silence. Send negotiators, as Sera suggests. Give them 2 weeks to find a solution before we consider other measures. 3 weeks later, the dispute was resolved. The packs had agreed to shared hunting schedules and collaborative resource management, each receiving what they needed without conflict. It was the first territorial dispute in 50 years that ended without bloodshed or forced submission. The council couldn't ignore the result. Neither could Kade. He found Sera in the palace library one evening, surrounded by books on pack history and governance. You're studying us, he observed, settling into a chair across from her. Trying to understand. Your kingdom is built on clear hierarchies. Alpha, Beta, Omega. Each designated at birth, each assigned a role. It creates order. But you disagree with it. I think it confuses designation with destiny. She closed the book she'd been reading. Being born Omega doesn't make someone weak, just like being born Alpha doesn't make someone a good leader. Those are just starting points. What matters is what we do with them. You think my entire system is flawed. I think your entire system is incomplete. Sera leaned forward. You've built a kingdom on strength, and that's created stability. But strength alone isn't enough to create real loyalty, real unity. That requires something more. What? Trust, choice, the belief that the wolf leading you sees you as valuable beyond your designation, beyond your utility. That they're strong enough to listen, not just command. Kade was quiet for a long moment. You know what you're describing would upend centuries of tradition. I know. That's why it terrifies your council. Does it terrify you? No, because I've seen what happens when wolves are valued for who they are rather than what they're labeled. I was trained by elders outside the pack system. Wolves who believed in balance, in developing each individual's strengths regardless of designation. I've watched Omegas become brilliant strategists, Betas become compassionate healers, Alphas learn genuine humility. When you remove the limitations of expectation, you discover what wolves are actually capable of. And you think my kingdom needs this. I think your kingdom is ready for it, whether your council realizes it or not. Sera gestured toward the window, where the lights of the capital glowed in the darkness. Look at what's already changing. Warriors learning restraint. Servants having their voices heard. Territorial disputes resolved through conversation rather than conquest. You gave me access to your kingdom, and it responded to a different kind of leadership. That should tell you something. What Kade does next will shock you. Don't stop now. Kade stood and walked to the window, his silhouette powerful against the night sky. Do you know what the council calls you behind closed doors? I can imagine the quiet storm, because you move through this palace creating change without raising your voice, without demanding attention, but leaving everything different in your wake. He turned to face her. They're afraid of you, Sera, not because you're violent or aggressive, but because you prove everything they believe about Omegas is wrong. And if they're wrong about that, what else might they be wrong about? Are they wrong about you? Absolutely. He moved closer. But that's not what you're really asking. You want to know if I think the system itself is wrong. Do you? Kade was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine uncertainty. I've ruled for 2 centuries, believing that clear hierarchy created order, that strength maintained peace, that dominance prevented chaos. And it has, largely. My kingdom is stable, prosperous, powerful. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how wolves respond to a different kind of leadership, I'm starting to wonder if stability and peace aren't the same thing. If what I've created is order without understanding why order matters. Why does it matter? I always believed it was to prevent the strong from destroying the weak. But you're making me wonder if true strength is in not needing to establish dominance at all. Sera stood, meeting his eyes with that characteristic directness. You're one of the most powerful alphas in history, Kade. You could crush anyone who opposed you. But real power, the kind that lasts, that transforms, comes from choosing not to crush, from being strong enough to listen, to change, to admit when tradition has outlived its purpose. You're asking me to overturn everything my kingdom is built on. No, I'm suggesting you might want to build on top of it. Keep the strength, the structure, the stability, but add something new, the recognition that every wolf, regardless of designation, has inherent value and potential. That leadership isn't about controlling others, but empowering them. And if the council refuses, if the traditional alphas rebel, then you'll discover whether your strength comes from position or from character, whether you lead through fear or through genuine authority. She paused, but I don't think it will come to that. I think most wolves are hungry for this change, even if they don't realize it yet. They're just waiting for someone strong enough to show them it's possible. The next morning, Kade called an emergency council session. The room was tense as the council members assembled, clearly uncomfortable with the precedent of Sera's continued presence and growing influence. Counselor Thorne looked particularly severe, his disapproval radiating like cold winter air. Kade didn't sit. He stood before them, his presence commanding absolute attention. For weeks, you've watched me allow an Omega unprecedented access to our kingdom. You've questioned it, resented it, feared it. Today, I'm going to explain why I did it and what I've learned. He gestured to Sera, who stood calmly to the side. Sera defeated 6 elite guards without killing them. This single act demonstrated something I've spent 2 centuries as king trying to cultivate: strength with control, power with purpose. She didn't win through superior violence. She won through superior understanding of what strength actually means. Your Majesty, Thorn interrupted. Surely you're not suggesting we model our kingdom after the choices of a runaway Omega. I'm suggesting, Kade said, his voice sharp enough to cut, that we recognize when truth emerges from unexpected sources. In the weeks Sera has been here, I've watched our kingdom improve in measurable ways. Training injuries decreased because she taught warriors about restraint and technique. Servant efficiency increased because she noticed their struggles and suggested solutions. A 50-year pattern of territorial violence was broken because she asked what wolves actually needed rather than who deserved dominance. He paused, letting his words sink in. These aren't threats to our system. They're improvements to it. But they require us to recognize something we've avoided acknowledging, that designation at birth doesn't determine value or capability. The council erupted in protests, but Kade raised his hand for silence. This is the moment everything changes. You need to hear this. I'm not dismantling our hierarchy, he continued. Structure has its place, and clear leadership prevents chaos. But I am evolving how we understand that hierarchy. From this day forward, designation Alpha, Beta, Omega will be recognized as a starting point, not a limitation. Every wolf in this kingdom will have the opportunity to develop their strengths, to contribute their insights, to be valued for their character and capability rather than their birth label. This is madness. Thorn stood abruptly. You're destroying centuries of tradition. I'm preserving what matters about tradition while discarding what limits us, Kade countered. The tradition of strength, preserved. The tradition of leadership, enhanced. But the tradition of assuming Omegas are inherently weak, that only Alphas can lead, that value comes from designation rather than demonstration. That ends now. And what happens when chaos ensues? When wolves stop respecting hierarchy entirely, then we'll address it. But I don't believe chaos will ensue because we're not removing authority, we're making it more meaningful. We're saying that respect must be earned through action, not assumed through designation. That the wolves who lead should do so because they're genuinely capable, not simply because they were born alpha. He turned to the full council. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm informing you of the new direction this kingdom will take. But I am asking for your support, your wisdom in implementing these changes thoughtfully and effectively. Because this isn't about rebellion or revolution. It's about evolution. It's about becoming the kingdom we've always had the potential to be. The room fell into charged silence. Finally, an older counselor named Myra, who'd been quietly observing the entire exchange, spoke. Your Majesty, I've served this council for 70 years. I've watched kingdoms rise and fall, traditions upheld and abandoned. And I've learned that the kingdoms that survive aren't the ones that resist all change. They're the ones that know when to adapt. She looked at Sera with something like respect. This Omega has proven herself not through defiance, but through demonstration. She's shown us what's possible when we look past our assumptions. I support this evolution. One by one, other council members began to voice cautious agreement. Not all of them Thorn and his closest allies remained staunchly opposed, but enough to create momentum. Kade nodded, satisfied. Then we begin. Sera, he turned to her directly. You've sparked this change, whether you intended to or not. I'd like you to help guide its implementation. Not as Omega, not as outsider, but as advisor. As someone who understands what we're reaching for. Sera met his gaze, and for the first time since arriving, she smiled, a genuine expression that softened her usually guarded features. I'll help, on one condition. Name it, that you remember why you're doing this. Not to please me, not to prove something to your council, but because you genuinely believe every wolf in your kingdom deserves the chance to become their fullest self. The moment this becomes about politics instead of principle, I walk away. Agreed. Over the following months, the kingdom transformed in ways subtle and profound. Training programs were restructured to focus on individual strengths rather than designation-based assumptions. Omegas who showed aptitude for strategy were given opportunities to study tactics. Betas with healing talents were apprenticed to medical experts. Alphas who excelled at diplomacy rather than combat were channeled toward negotiation roles. The changes didn't happen overnight, and they weren't without resistance. Traditional alphas complained about their status being diminished. Some omegas, conditioned to submission, struggled with the sudden expectation of autonomy. There were failures, conflicts, moments when the old way seemed simpler, clearer. But there were also breakthroughs. A young omega named Lena, who'd spent her life in the kitchens, revealed a gift for mathematical precision and was apprenticed to the kingdom's chief architect. Her designs for improved water systems saved thousands of gallons and prevented disease. A massive alpha named Garrett, assumed to be a natural warrior, admitted he felt more drawn to teaching children. He became one of the kingdom's most beloved educators. His size and strength making younglings feel protected while they learned. Cross-designation training pairs were established, alphas learning restraint from omegas, omegas learning confidence from alphas, betas teaching both groups about balance and mediation. The kingdom didn't become weaker. It became more resilient. Throughout it all, Sera worked alongside Kade, offering insights, answering questions, challenging assumptions. Their partnership became the physical embodiment of the kingdom's evolution, the powerful Alpha King and the Omega advisor, neither dominant nor submissive, simply working in alignment toward shared goals. But the story doesn't end here. What happens next will leave you with questions. One evening, nearly a year after Sera's arrival, Kade found her on the palace walls, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, joining her. "Walking away from your original pack, the life you could have had if you just accepted your designation. Sera was quiet for a moment. Every path has its cost. I paid mine in loneliness, in years of wandering, in being called runaway and rebel and worse. But I gained something more valuable, the absolute certainty that I am not what I was labeled. I'm what I chose to become. And what did you choose? To be someone who proves that strength comes in forms we don't always recognize. That leadership isn't about who can dominate, but who can elevate. That every wolf, given the chance, has the potential to surprise everyone, including themselves. She glanced at him. What about you? Do you regret allowing a runaway Omega to challenge your entire kingdom? Kade laughed, the sound genuine and free. Not for a moment. You've made me a better king, Sera. Not because you tore down what I built, but because you showed me how to build higher. My kingdom is stronger now, not through greater control, but through greater trust. And your counsel, even Thorn still disagrees with nearly everything you represent. But even he can't deny the results. Territorial disputes are down. Internal conflicts are resolved faster and more fairly. Wolves are more engaged, more productive, more loyal, because that loyalty comes from choice now, not compulsion. He paused, though I suspect he still calls you the quiet storm when he thinks I can't hear. I've been called worse. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and stars emerge. You know, Kade said slowly, you could stay, permanently. Not as guest, not as advisor, but as... Don't, Sera interrupted gently. Don't offer me a title or position that locks me into a new kind of designation. I'm not meant to be defined by a role in your kingdom, Kade. I'm meant to be proof that wolves can exist outside rigid definitions entirely. Then what are you meant to be? A reminder, a challenge, a question mark in a world that prefers periods. She smiled. Your kingdom doesn't need me to stay to continue evolving. It needs to remember why it started. Every wolf who watches an Omega contribute strategy, or an Alpha excel at nurture, or a Beta lead a revolution of thought, they carry forward what I represented. That's more powerful than any permanent position I could hold. So you're leaving, eventually, when I'm sure the changes can sustain themselves without me, when the new way of thinking is strong enough to withstand the inevitable pushback from tradition. She looked at him directly. But not yet. There's still work to do. Good, Kade said, and there was relief in his voice. Because I'm not ready for the quiet storm to pass. This kingdom still needs shaking. Here, where I need you to make a choice. Drop a comment below. Do you think Sera should stay in the kingdom permanently? Or is she right that leaving makes her message stronger? Your answer might surprise you. Months continued to unfold, each bringing new challenges and changes. A delegation from a neighboring kingdom arrived, curious about the rumors of Kade's revolutionary approach to pack dynamics. Their Alpha King was skeptical, certain that eliminating rigid hierarchy would breed chaos. Kade invited him to observe freely, to see the kingdom in action. What the visiting Alpha witnessed was warriors training with focused intensity, but without the brutal hazing that had once been standard. He saw Omegas contributing to council discussions, their insights given weight based on merit rather than dismissed based on designation. He watched Sera move through the palace, neither bowing nor boasting, simply existing as herself, respected, valued, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with physical dominance. This shouldn't work, the visiting Alpha told Kade over dinner. Everything I've learned says that without clear hierarchy, without dominant alphas maintaining order, a kingdom falls apart. And yet, Kade replied calmly, my kingdom is more unified than it's ever been, stronger, more innovative. My wolves don't follow me because they fear punishment for disobedience. They follow because they trust that their voices matter, that their potential will be recognized, that strength is about building up rather than pressing down. And when the next crisis comes, when you need absolute obedience, immediate action, then I'll command it, and I'll be obeyed, not because I've conditioned them to submit, but because they trust my judgment enough to follow, even when they don't fully understand. Kade leaned forward. True authority isn't forced. It's earned. And it's far more powerful than dominance could ever be. The visiting Alpha left thoughtful, uncertain, but unable to deny what he'd witnessed. Word spread to other kingdoms. Some mocked Kade's approach as weakness. Others sent quiet inquiries, curious about implementation. The 7 territories, unified under Kade's rule, became a grand experiment, a test of whether strength and compassion could coexist, whether hierarchy could be meaningful without being oppressive. And through it all, Sera remained the quiet center of the storm, never seeking spotlight, but always present when needed, offering perspective that cut through assumption to truth. The question everyone's asking, what happens when Sera finally leaves? Keep watching to find out. The moment came on a crisp autumn morning, nearly 2 years after Sera's arrival. She found Kade in his private study, reviewing reports from across the territories. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression told him immediately why she'd come. You're leaving. It's time. He set down the papers, his jaw tight. The kingdom still needs you. The kingdom needs what I represented, not me specifically. And it has that now. Look around, Kade. Wolves are questioning assumptions, developing their potential regardless of designation, choosing leadership based on capability rather than birth label. The change has taken root. It doesn't need me to water it anymore. And if I asked you to stay, not as advisor, not as symbol, but as he paused, struggling with words, as someone I've come to rely on, someone whose insight I trust more than anyone in my council, someone who's become. Don't, Sera said softly. Don't make this about personal attachment. We both know that's not what this is really about, isn't it? She moved closer, her expression gentle but firm. You don't need me, Kade. You never did. What you needed was permission to trust your own instincts about leadership, to believe that strength could look different than you'd been taught. I gave you that permission by proving it was possible. But the actual work, the actual change, that was all you. You had the courage to question centuries of tradition. You had the strength to resist your council's fears. You had the wisdom to recognize that evolution isn't betrayal of the past, it's honoring of the future. And what about what you need? You've spent years wandering, always an outsider, never belonging anywhere. Here you could have a home, a place, a designation, she smiled. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. If I stay, I become the Omega advisor, the exception, the symbol. Every decision I make, every word I speak, becomes about what it represents for Omega rights, for designation politics, for the grand experiment. I lose the ability to just be Sera, so you'll go back to wandering. I'll go back to being free. Free to be myself without the weight of representation. Free to find other places that need what I've learned, other wolves who need someone to show them that strength comes in unexpected forms. She paused, and free to trust that the work we started here will continue without me, which is the only way to know it's real. Kade was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. When? Tomorrow morning. Quietly. No ceremony, no formal goodbye, just like I arrived. The council will want to acknowledge. The council will be relieved I'm leaving, Sera said with a wry smile. Let them be. Their relief doesn't diminish what we've accomplished. And if I ordered you to stay, as your king, she met his eyes with that characteristic directness he'd come to know so well. You won't, because you understand that real strength doesn't need to hold on. It can let go and trust that what matters will remain. He stood, moving around the desk to stand before her. For a moment, he looked like he might argue further. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for seeing what this kingdom could be, for having the courage to show us, for shaking everything we thought we knew and proving we could survive the earthquake." You didn't just survive it, Sera replied. You grew from it. Don't forget that when the traditionalists push back, when the old ways seem easier, when the cost of change feels too high. Remember that growth is never comfortable, but it's always worth it. What Sera does next will leave you wondering. Don't miss the ending. She left at dawn, as promised. No fanfare, no escort, just a lone figure with a traveler's pack walking through the palace gates as the sun painted the world in shades of gold. Kade watched from his window, resisting the urge to call her back. He understood, intellectually, why she had to go. But emotionally, it felt like losing something essential, not a person exactly, but a mirror that had shown him truths he needed to see. By mid-morning, word of her departure had spread through the palace, then the capital, then beyond. Reactions varied wildly. Some celebrated, relieved that the troublesome Omega was finally gone. Others mourned, feeling they'd lost an advocate, a symbol of possibility. But most felt something more complex. a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty, pride in how far they'd come and anxiety about maintaining that progress without her quiet presence to guide them. In the training yards, warriors continued practicing the techniques she'd observed and improved. In the council chambers, debates included perspectives from wolves of all designations, their voices carrying weight earned through demonstration rather than assumed through birth. In homes and shops and gathering places across the kingdom, wolves spoke more openly about their dreams, their potential, their right to become something beyond their designation. The quiet storm had passed, but the changes it wrought remained. Weeks later, a report reached Kade's desk. A territorial dispute in the western regions had been resolved through negotiation rather than force. The wolves involved specifically citing the kingdom's new approach to conflict resolution. A young Omega had been appointed to a strategic planning position based purely on her demonstrated analytical skills. An Alpha warrior had requested reassignment to diplomatic service, confident that his value wasn't diminished by choosing a path other than combat. The evolution was continuing, expanding, becoming simply the way things were done. Counselor Myra found Kade reviewing these reports, a slight smile on his usually stern face. Missing her, she asked. Every day, he admitted. But she was right. The kingdom doesn't need her specifically. It needs the questions she taught us to ask, the assumptions she taught us to challenge, the courage she taught us to value. He looked up. We're better for her having been here, and we're better for her having left, because it proves the change was real. Thorn still grumbles that she was a disruptive influence who undermined centuries of tradition. Thorn is absolutely correct, Kade said with a quiet laugh. She was disruptive. She did undermine tradition. And thank the ancestors for that, because some traditions deserve to be questioned. Do you think she'll come back? I don't know. Part of me hopes she does, just to see her again, to hear her perspective on how we're progressing. But another part hopes she stays away, keeps wandering, keeps finding other places that need shaking up. He paused. The world has too many wolves content with the way things are. It needs more like her wolves willing to prove that strength comes in forms we don't expect, that leadership is about elevation rather than domination, that every individual has value beyond their designation. And you, how has she changed you? Kade considered the question carefully. She taught me that being powerful enough to crush opposition isn't nearly as important as being wise enough to listen to it. That real authority comes from earning trust, not demanding obedience. That the strongest thing a leader can do is admit when they're wrong and be brave enough to change course. He smiled. She taught me that an Alpha King can learn from an Omega, and that acknowledging that doesn't diminish his authority, it enhances it. Here's the truth most people won't tell you about power and change. Listen carefully. Months turned to years. The kingdom continued evolving. The changes Sera had sparked becoming deeper, more nuanced, more integrated into the culture. Challenges arose, of course. Some wolves struggled with with the increased responsibility that came with greater autonomy. Some traditionalists organized resistance, arguing that the old ways had served the kingdom well for centuries. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments when the easier path seemed to be reverting to rigid hierarchy and clear designation-based roles. But each time those moments arose, Kade would remind the kingdom and himself of what had been gained. The innovation that came from allowing every wolf to contribute their unique strengths. The loyalty that came from being valued rather than controlled. The resilience that came from diversity of thought and capability. And in those moments of doubt, he would remember Sera's final words to him, spoken just before she left. Real change is uncomfortable. It should be. If it were easy, everyone would do it. The fact that it's hard, that it requires constant attention and courage and willingness to course correct, that's what makes it meaningful. Word of Kade's approach spread to distant kingdoms. Some adopted similar philosophies, experimenting with loosening designation restrictions and valuing wolves based on capability. Others doubled down on tradition, viewing Kade's methods as dangerous weakness. History would judge which approach proved more sustainable. But in Kade's kingdom, in the 7 territories under his rule, something fundamental had shifted. Wolves walked with different confidence, not the aggressive dominance of traditional alphas, but the quiet assurance that came from being seen, valued, trusted to become their fullest selves. And somewhere in the wider world, a lone Omega wandered forest paths and mountain passes, her presence leaving subtle changes wherever she went, questioning, challenging, proving through simple existence that strength could wear unexpected faces. The quiet storm moving through the world, leaving transformation in her wake. Now I need to know, what do you think happens next? Does Sera ever return to Kade's kingdom? Do other territories adopt his approach, or does traditional hierarchy push back? Drop your theories in the comments. And if this story made you think differently about power, leadership, or what strength really means, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because I've got more stories that'll challenge everything you thought you knew. The conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning. So tell me, what's one tradition in your world that deserves to be questioned? Share below. I'll see you in the next one.